The problematic prince. Your Highness, are you awake? Came the soft, high-pitched voice of Mrs. Fitz. Erna thought she was in a dream still, as the voice roused her from unconsciousness. To call it sleep felt like an understatement. Fear crept across her face as she woke in an unfamiliar room and naked. Yes, Erna said quickly and sat up, pulling bedsheets over herself. Doing so sent a shock of pain up her, and she was reminded of last night. I'm awake. As she pulled the bedsheets up, she saw the large blood stain that no longer looked like a flowering rose, but like someone was murdered in her bed. Okay, I'm coming in, Mrs. Fitz said. No, Erna called out. She scrambled off the bed and tried to walk on shaky legs. They buckled under her and she collapsed to the floor. Erna forced herself to her feet and gathered up the bloody sheets. She looked around for somewhere to hide them, and she saw on the clock that it was already noon. Were you still asleep? While Erna struggled to think of what to do, Mrs. Fitz continued to knock on the door and pass words of concern through the thick wooden door. I'm coming in, Your Highness. Erna panicked and remembered the bathroom. She bolted for it with bedsheets in tow and slammed the door closed, just as the bedroom door opened. For some time, Mrs. Fitz was seized by bewilderment. She eventually regained her composure. A messy bed, pajamas all over the floor, wine glasses with dregs left in them, and a disappearing Grand Duchess. Mrs. Fitz saw the hem of the bed covers stuck in the bathroom door. Every go back and wait, Mrs. Fitz said to the maids snooping around the bedroom door. Hurry, go on, get away. Even though Mrs. Fitz did not use stern words to shoo the maids away, they dispersed in good order. Even Lisa, who couldn't help but feel like she should linger, had to turn away back down the hall. After confirming no one was sneaking about, Mrs. Fitz closed the bedroom door and approached the bathroom. Your Highness, we are alone now. You can come out. There was a short pause. Yes, I'm sorry, Mrs. Fitz. A thin, trembling voice came from the other side of the door. That's fine. How are you feeling? I'm okay. It's just... Erna was speechless, but Mrs. Fitz was patient and waited for Erna to come out in her own time. She busied herself cleaning up the mess of the bedroom. For Bjorn, he woke up in the morning and went about his ablutions as if nothing had happened. He washed, dressed, and had breakfast, all without once mentioning his wife. It was as if he'd completely forgot she existed. Mrs. Fitz had a bad feeling, an ominous feeling. She didn't dare guess what was going on between the couple, but she knew that this was not a normal scene for a new bride. The same was true of the groom, who only seemed faithful to his usual way of life on his first day of being married. If you are uncomfortable bathing, I will tell the maid not to come. Mrs. Fitz called out toward the bathroom. But I am going to need that sheet. It wasn't that Mrs. Fitz couldn't guess what the pair had been up to in the middle of the night, but it was polite not to mention it directly. Either way, the sheet would have to be thrown out. It couldn't be left as it was. The door slowly opened and Mrs. Fitz backed up a little, allowing Erna all the space she needed. There was a moment's silence, and Mrs. Fitz swallowed when she finally saw Erna on the threshold. The Grand Duchess sloppily covered her naked form with the bed sheet, stood there staring at the ground by her feet. She looked so haggard that it was hard to believe she was nobility. Bloodshot and puffy eyes, tousled hair, and red marks about her neck and chest. Thank you, Your Highness, Mrs. Fitz said and reached to take the bedsheet. She backed away the moment she had it and did not look directly at Erna. Prince, if only, I would. The angry thought sent heat through the old nanny. If Bjorn stood in front of her right now, she would have given him more than an earful. If Bjorn had married this woman out of love, then why was he not here? If he did love Erna, he would have stayed by her side, been with her all night, and not up until his own ends were satisfied. With a sigh, Mrs. Fitz took the laundry away. The bed sheet was carefully wrapped so that no traces of blood could be seen. What a morning for the first day of being Grand Duchess. She was more than worried for her future. "Thank you, Mrs. Fitz," Erna repeated an unknown number of times. "You're welcome," Mrs. Fitz replied. "This is a drug that will help calm your nerves. Eat and get some rest." At first, it seemed like Mrs. Fitz was being stern, like a school matron, but her expression was soft and warming. "But you were to give me a tour of the mansion," Erna protested. "It's fine. We can postpone for one day. The prince has requested that," Mrs. Fitz lied. Erna was lost in thought for a moment. She really wasn't up for walking around the grand palace anyway, not with her body aching the way it did. She appreciated Bjorn's concern. Erna laid back down in the bed and Mrs. Fitz, satisfied, left, leaving Erna alone in the bedroom. It was kind of cozy, with the curtains drawn and the fireplace glow. She felt very lonely all of a sudden. She had spent the first days of her marriage alone, on her bed, with her body aching still. Her grandmother had been so excited to hear that Erna was going to be the Grand Duchess of the entire kingdom. If she could see Erna now, would she have been disappointed? "Grandmother," Erna whispered. Her heart ached for her grandmother. It had been at the reception that Erna learned the Baroness had returned to Beaufort. Erna was embittered when she learned her grandmother left without saying goodbye, but she knew that everyone in this high society has their place, and her grandmother's was in Beaufort. Erna's thoughts made her restless, and she tossed and turned in the bed before staring up at the ceiling with a pensive look on her face. None of this felt right. The named Dniester, this palace, Bjorn, none of it felt like hers. Her mind drifted to the other night, and the energy of the medicine spread fast. Her tired body stiffened, and she couldn't believe that just thinking about that night got her heat rising and made her breathless. Bjorn was friendly, and he was heartless. He was as warm as he was cold. It was strange to see such disparity in one man. How could opposite aspects exist at once? There must be some falsity to Bjorn, but Erna could not detect any fabrication or lie. The more she looked at Bjorn, the more she realized she didn't know, and because of her cluttered mind, nightmares and bad dreams followed. She dreamed of being eaten alive by a wolf. The Grand Duke's carriage returned to Schubert Palace just as the sun settled in the west. Despite his busy schedule, Bjorn did not look tired. He was the same as usual. He exchanged brief glances with the servants as they came out to meet him. Mrs. Fitz fell in behind him as he strode toward the entrance hall. "Her Highness is asleep. She seems unwell, so I told her to rest," Mrs. Fitz said. "Okay, you have been busy with getting married. Maybe a few days' rest for you is in order?" Bjorn sensed a thorn in the question. "I'll enjoy some rest on my honeymoon," Bjorn said. "That's over 2 weeks away, my prince." Mrs. Fitz frowned. "Has the Grand Duchess already swayed you to her side?" "I beg your pardon?" "There's no way you don't know the honeymoon isn't just a honeymoon," Bjorn said, pausing on the landing and turning to face Mrs. Fitz. He smiled, but it did not go as far as his eyes. The honeymoon was just a formality. In reality, it was an overseas diplomatic mission. It was important to reaffirm alliances and to check the intricate web of political power was intact, especially after such a major event as raising up a new Grand Duchess. It had been Bjorn's job since the laying down of the crown. A visit by the king, or crown prince, is a major political act, but a prince who disbanded from the throne would not cause as big a fuss. Couple that with the ruse of going on a honeymoon, Bjorn was able to effectively spy on other countries with ease, as well as scout out financial markets. "So why do you say such things?" "There must be a reason. Have you so quickly abandoned me?" Bjorn said with a sly smile. Your Highness, to abandon me in just one day, you don't even look sad about it. Bjorn's intentions were made clear as he overemphasized his wounded pride. Your childish jokes is what pushed me to her. It was not a difficult choice, my prince. Mrs. Fitz said. Even after all these years, she could not get used to his flirtatious jokes so far. Sensing the clearly drawn line, Mrs. Fitz stepped back. I'm sorry, Your Highness. Don't be like that, Bjorn said, smiling. He climbed up the stairs like he was that child again, and Mrs. Fitz followed, preparing the words for her report. Mrs. Fitz, Bjorn said. She found him sat cross-legged in the chair by the window, opening the letter he had just received. Like you said, there are 15 days until the boat trip, plenty of time to teach my wife. Yes. Since there wasn't an adult in Erna's life that could have taught her the bedroom chores, we need someone else to do it now. Mrs. Fitz was stunned at the calm and monotonous manner in which Bjorn had given the command. She obeyed with her own calm demeanor. I will send for the right person for the job, Your Highness. If I may, please speak. Why her, Your Highness? What was the reason for wanting this young girl as your wife? She knew she was being presumptuous to ask such a question, but her curiosity was out of control. Erna, Bjorn started to say, then stopped, as if pondering the great mysteries of the world. Because she's pretty, Your Highness? Mrs. Fitz said, breathless. She's a very pretty woman. Bjorn turned to the window and opened the letter. Isn't she? Mrs. Fitz had told her that it was customary for the bride to write a letter of thanks to all those who had attended the wedding, and after so many, addressed to people she never knew. Her wrist throbbed. But thanks to Mrs. Fitz, they had all been written out without a single mistake. Only after fulfilling her duties as the Grand Duchess was she able to write letters to her family, to her grandmother, and the people of House Baden and Pavel. Once the letter was finished, Lisa moved in with the hot wax and dribbled a few drops on the fold of the envelope. Erna then pressed the stamp firmly on the quickly cooling wax and left a rather bold-looking wax seal. Lisa clapped her hands together. You really do look like a Grand Duchess, she said as she picked up the letter and examined it. Erna gave a shy smile and flushed a little from embarrassment. It has only one stamp. She tidied up the writing desk, not leaving a single piece out of place. Putting the quills back in their stand and closing up the inkwells, putting them in their little alcove. It was her writing desk, but it didn't feel like it yet. Isn't this the gentleman you were supposed to meet? Lisa said as she checked the name and address of the letter. Yes, Pavel Lor. Erna's answer was so unreserved, it caught Lisa off guard. Lisa's eyes narrowed as she prepared the letter. Pavel Lor, the respectable Royal Academy of Art painter. If only he bore a title of some sort, so that he could associate with his childhood friend. Even though their relationship was a long one and plain, it was a little too plain. Oh, I nearly forgot. The goods have arrived, Lisa said, remembering why she came to her mistress' study in the first place. The goods? Erna questioned. Yes, the things to bring to your honeymoon, goods that will make you look so pretty. Go, have a look. Lisa smiled, taking Erna's hand. Unable to subdue Lisa's sudden excitement, Erna stood and allowed her maid to bring her to the goods. Mrs. Fitz had been in charge of organizing the honeymoon and was unaware that the old nanny had ordered Erna some new things to take with her. She already had enough and was unaware she needed yet more. Look, aren't they pretty? Lisa said. Erna had allowed Lisa to lead her to the bedroom, where, piled on the floor, were beautifully wrapped boxes. They contained hats, shoes, dresses, and coats. To top it all off, there was a beautiful new trunk to store them all in. Erna felt embarrassed to be so lavishly doted on. No matter where you go, you will be the most beautiful. I will make sure of it. I have been learning hard with Mrs. Fitz, Lisa said. It seemed like such a weighty task to entrust a fledgling maid, but Erna would not permit anyone else, not even Mrs. Fitz, to attend her during the honeymoon, which meant Lisa was coming with her, and if Erna could help it, Lisa would be by her side no matter where she found herself. All of the items that Mrs. Fitz had picked out suited Erna very well, and Erna enjoyed these delicately beautiful things, especially since she was used to the vulgar things Viscount Hardy always seemed to parade around with. "Are you not happy, Your Highness?" Lisa said. She noticed that Erna did not display the same level of excitement as her. Instead, she stood staring blankly at the display of elegant dresses and dainty shoes. Maybe the frills were too much for her taste. "No, it's not that," Erna said. Erna's heart grew heavy as she thought all of these presents before her might have come from Bjorn. All the debt the Hardy family already owed, and things just seemed to keep piling up. How long until Erna outstays her welcome, pushes the debt too far? How much more is Bjorn going to put up with the Hardy family taking from him? "I think I understand. After all, the first destination on the honeymoon is Lars," Lisa said, misunderstanding the lengthy silence. "You must be upset. I am too, Your Highness." "I'm fine, Lisa," Erna said, trying to smile. There must be a reason that they go to Gladys' home country. The Grand Duke and Duchess were not just off on some fancy honeymoon like normal newlywed couples. "Don't worry, I won't let anyone compare you to Princess Gladys. You will be the prettiest in this world," Lisa continued, reaffirming her fighting spirit. Mrs. Fitz came into the room with a serious look that made Erna's heart sink. She gave Lisa a glare that made the maid shrink away. "Guests have arrived, Your Highness," the old woman said. "A guest?" "Ah, yes," Erna said. She was suddenly reminded of the day's itinerary that Mrs. Fitz had briefed her on that morning. The only thing of any note was a royal tutor coming to teach Erna what she didn't know yet. His father was very skilled. He had awe for his father, who had baited him with something he could never refuse. It made him chuckle lightly. "I'll deposit all my savings into the bank," something Bjorn was forced to agree to thanks to his father's unconventional condition. He had been offered a considerable amount, and the symbolism of managing the king's fortune caused the banks to practically go to war with each other. This in a time where the banks controlled the capital market. Whomsoever got to look after the king's fortune would also gain royal favor. It felt like Bjorn was taking more than just the bait. The first destination on the royal honeymoon was Lars, which was the most important political destination. It was also a very important visit for his bank too, as he was going to gobble up one of Lars' insolvent commercial banks. "Shall we begin the merger then?" Bjorn had concluded the meeting. The directors, who had settled in for a long debate, rose from their seats with grinning faces full of joy. They hurriedly left the study, leaving Bjorn half laid out in his chair. Bjorn was eager to get this underway, mostly because it meant he could relax on the boat during the crossing. Come to think of it, his wife, Erna, the Grand Duchess, must be finished preparing to leave by now. At that moment, when Bjorn remembered the radiant and pale face of his beautiful wife, he heard the bank directors exclaim at the door, "Ah, Your Highness." It seemed like they ran into Erna on their way out. Bjorn massaged his own neck as he turned to face the door and saw Erna come into the study. She stepped forward with urgent meaning in her gait. "Bjorn, can we talk for a second?" she asked. Her tone was more agitated than usual. Bjorn sat upright and nodded, while Erna came across the room and sat in the chair opposite facing him. "What's the matter, Erna?" Bjorn said slowly. He was studying Erna's hair and the elaborate shape of the bun braid. Her maid was improving quite well. "I heard it was you who asked Mrs. Fitz to teach me that," Erna eventually said, after a couple false starts. "Ah, that." Bjorn nodded calmly. He reached forward and took up the glass of water on the table. Erna looked off to the side, embarrassment flushing her cheeks. She gave them a little rub before turning back to Bjorn again. It seemed that she had not learned very well. "Did you not come because I was too clumsy or because I was ignorant?" Erna asked. "What? Me not coming?" Though confused by the question, Bjorn remained flat and cool. "You never came to my bedroom, not since that day," Erna said. Her delicate little hands twisted the hem of her dress as she spoke with a trembling voice. The conscious smile slowly melted from Bjorn's face as he became more aware of Erna. "Well, if you know that, then shouldn't you be doing your part, not here?" Bjorn let out a sigh. The real reason he had not returned to Erna since that night was that he was just plain busy. He had to stay in the capital and could not return to the palace when he would like. Of course, he couldn't tell Erna that. He had to leave her believing what she believed. The pleasure of his wife's body was great, but he did not want to have to go through the trouble of dealing with her ignorance again. He will come to her again when she is ready to be a proper wife. Erna would wait for him. "I have a lot I know I am lacking in that respect. I realize that I got married without know the things I should know as a wife," Erna said. She had been looking down at her feet as she spoke. "I am really sorry." Mrs. Peg, who is said to have taught all the royal ladies the work of the bedchamber, was a gentle and kind person. Erna followed easily as she explained what was expected of her, step by step. As soon as Mrs. Peg mentioned anything sexual, Erna lost all consciousness and fell away into an absent coma. Erna couldn't stand it and in the end, bolted from the classroom, spraying apologies to Mrs. Peg on the way out. "I will learn," Erna said to Bjorn. "I know it's part of my role. I will not shirk my responsibilities, but..." Erna paused to catch her breath. "But I don't want anyone else to teach me. If at all possible, Bjorn, I want you to teach me." "What?" Bjorn said after taking a moment to fight off the drunken haze muddling his thoughts in the face of his wife's demands. And even though he had just scolded her for skipping her duties, she was scolding him for skipping his. "You are my husband, so teach me," Erna said, firmly. Bjorn let out a sigh, mixed with light laughter as he took on board what his wife was saying. Erna's cheeks were brightly flushed at that moment. She acted so brazenly, like she was retrieving something that was rightfully hers. "Erna, are you serious?" As his fingers clenched in disbelief, Bjorn asked. She hesitated at first, but her answer came as strong as ever. "Yes, of course, I beg you with sincerity." Bjorn stared at her blankly for a moment. He felt like he knew enough about Erna by now to know when this woman wasn't playing around, but it still felt like she knew more than she was putting on. Either from brochures or the telling of vague stories, was she really acting like she knew nothing of bedchamber education? "Can you teach me?" She was being bashful, like she had run away from class, only to later return and realize she had missed out on a lot. He found her ignorance cute and hateful at the same time. "Bjorn." She said his name, pleadingly, and he felt a tingle run through him, followed by a warmth when she looked at him with those big, innocent eyes. As Bjorn reached up and pulled the tie of his dress loose, a sharp knock came at the door. "Your Highness?" Mrs. Fitz called. Upon hearing the old nanny's voice, Erna wore an expression that could only be described as a deer caught in a trap. Her big, wet eyes pleadingly looked up at Bjorn. Desperation turned her smile the wrong way. Mrs. Fitz wore a face that reminded Bjorn of the time he had run and hid as a boy after accidentally knocking over one of his father's most prized paintings. He laughed and reached for a sip of water. "Your Highness, I've been looking all over the place for you. You know you shouldn't be here," Mrs. Fitz said to Erna. "Leave her be, Mrs. Fitz," Bjorn said. But the tutor Mrs. Fitz started to argue, but Bjorn raised a hand to silence her. "Lady Erna is my wife." He sounded ridiculous in his mind, but he would not reverse the decision, especially not after his actions made Erna smile at him, relief on her face. Beneath, he could see infinite confidence brewing in the young woman. "Tell the tutor we're sorry about the schedule clash, but we are having a few days off before our honeymoon," Bjorn said. "Yes," Mrs. Fitz said. She seemed little upset, but Mrs. Fitz skillfully suppressed her emotions. "But this is not polite to Mrs. Peg, Her Highness. The Grand Duchess must personally ask for her understanding and bring the matter to a proper conclusion." "Yes, of course," Bjorn said, looking at Erna, who nodded her head emphatically, with the confidence that said she could do anything. Mrs. Peg, the teacher, let her know that the Grand Duchess will have dinner with our guest. Maybe that will be a suitable apology for coming all this way. Mrs. Fitz's glare softened at the suitable suggestion. It would seem like maybe it would be a suitable apology after all. Mrs. Fitz bowed and left the study with the troublesome Grand Duchess. "Thank you, Bjorn," Erna said before she left. Bjorn tilted his head back. She was quite the naive and demanding woman. She was like hot ice or a dark sun, a dangerous deer. He always seemed to get caught out unexpectedly by dangerous deer. He would have thought he would have learned to put his guard up by now, but this deer was different to the previous deer, still very dangerous mind. It would have been boring to spend the time on the boat alone, so he was grateful to have Erna there with him. He liked the idea of enjoying the venison presented to him on his plate. She may be irritating in many ways, but she was also very delicious.